Dayak-European Sape-player.
Hi, I'm Sharaad Kuttan and welcome to Let's Talk, the show that brings you the most important conversations in art, culture and ideas. And as we approach Merdeka and Malaysia Day, the question of what unites the nation is of course going to be top of the agenda. We often talk about food as uniting the nation, but what about music? To help me in this conversation, I have Alena Murang. She is a sape player. She's Borneo-born, KL residing, half Dayak, half European. A very complex identity here. I'm going to have her help us understand that complexity in terms of her own artistic creation. She sings in the languages of Kelabit and Kenyah. Thank you so much, Alena, for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
To be honest, I must confess, I've never heard Kelabit and Kenyah. At least I don't think I have. And you know, it's one of those, I think, facts about Malaysian life that people don't know how diverse our linguistic landscape is. But before we get into that, I want to understand your own heritage and your own identity. How did you, and why do you identify as Bornean, somebody who lives in Kuala Lumpur?
Well, I only moved to Kuala Lumpur in 2011 for work. And I still, you know, Sarawak is home for me and Borneo is very much home. My father, he's Kelabit. And so I grew up very much in the traditions of the Kelabit people and also, you know, the wider Orang Ulu community, so the Kenyah people, the Kayan, even the Iban people and Bidayu. And my mother, she's an anthropologist, so she very much knew the importance of me learning and, you know, being exposed and experiencing all of these wonderful cultures and traditions.
Wonderful.
And
I studied anthropology myself at university. Yes, I did. And of course, you know, Borneo is a fascinating place for its cultural diversity. Do you tap into your other heritage, your European heritage, your English and Italian parts of you? Do you tap into that as well?
Not as much as I would like to. I spent my university years in north of England, in Manchester, and spent, you know, a bit of time in Italy. I identify more with my Italian side than I do with my English side, and I speak very basic Italian, but that's it. I think I identify more with my Sarawakian roots.
Okay, Manchester, of course, having an incredible music scene. At least it did in that documentary, 24-Hour Party People by Michael Winterbottom. Oh, brilliant. Mockumentary, actually, of the Manchester music scene. But let's come back here, okay, to Borneo and the setting. You said your mother's an anthropologist. Your father, what is your father's profession? Did that have any impact on your choice to become a musician?
Neither of my parents are very musical.
A recessive gene, maybe.
Yeah. My father, he works a lot helping people in the rural areas. So I think, you know, in a way, I am very much my parents' daughter. It's just that my route towards our heritage and supporting those in the kampong areas, as well as our people in the towns and cities, is through music right now and through the arts.
Yeah, how did that come out? It's not a natural progression, right? Not all of us fall into a kind of musical path. My mother, if I can just throw a bit of myself into the story, tried desperately to get me to learn the piano. I failed every time, and it was just wasted on me. Were you musical by nature? Is that something? Do you subscribe to this idea that people are by nature musical or not?
You know, I'm not sure. I haven't really thought about it, but I really do believe that anybody can learn how to sing, anybody can learn rhythm, and anybody can learn an instrument if they really put their mind to it. But I always say in the last few years that in our language and in many Dayak and Polynesian languages, there's no word for music and there's no word for art, because they were, you know, the music and the art was just part of life and they all had function. So even though I started to learn our traditional dance at a very young age, at the age of 6, and then later on sape at 11, and then our traditional forms of singing, I never thought of it as music. I just thought of it as this is what I learned as a young Kelabit girl. Yeah, and I think, you know, it was probably just 2-3 years ago I felt comfortable calling myself a musician. Because if you think about it, in the past, our music, so sape music, was used for ritual, or it was used to enable the whole kampong to dance or to sing together. It was never, I play the sape and I'm a musician, and then there's an audience.
So it's not kind of professional ethic around sape playing. Was, as you said, it's
There
kind of
wasn't.
embedded in the community.
Yeah.
Give us a sense. I mean, I love this idea of the entire community dancing. I mean, is this limited to people who live in small communities, rural communities, or even, you know, deeper into the interior, who can do that? Everybody can come out and dance together.
Yeah, I mean, so we used to live in longhouses, right? And some longhouses can have like 1,000 people living in it. Some have 200 people living in it. And you can imagine, you know, for us, there'd be maybe 2 people on the sape, and then people take turns to dance, or at the end, everybody will dance together. And so, yeah, there wasn't this idea of there's an audience, right? It was all participatory. And yeah, everybody dances together.
Okay, so is there a repertoire for the sape player? You know, and for people who don't know, because sape is a kind of lute-like instrument, it's a string instrument, isn't it? And it's quite spectacular as an instrument because it's large, isn't it? So tell us a little bit about the instrument and what kind of music is played on a sape.
Actually, nowadays the sape, so for example, the sape that I play is smaller than it originally was. And I started learning when I was 11, so 20 years ago. And in those 20 years, the sape has changed so much in its physical form. Like, we've made it shorter so that it can fit into car boots, so that we can use guitar strings. We've changed the tuning pegs. We've, you know, put electric pickups. So it's really interesting to have seen it evolve. And
that evolution you find in all instruments, right?
Yeah.
Harpsichords to pianos,
Yeah.
and had to do with auditoriums and the ability to amplify sound.
Yeah.
So tell us, what is the, so if we're talking about the trajectory of the sape, where is its evolution taking it? Is it for performance? Is it taking it out of its ritual context and into something like a concert hall or a, you know, a festival?
yeah, very much so. So it's enabling us to play it, you know, on like live TV and a bigger stage, because previously it would be, you know, the dead of the night in the rainforest, and you wouldn't really hear anything, and so you wouldn't need that big amplification, right? But nowadays we do, so it's really experimenting, you know, which guitar pickup do we use for the sape, because actually sape and guitar, they're not the same, they're similar but not the same. Yeah, so it's really interesting being a whole part of this evolution of the sape, and I'm really interested to see, I don't know, maybe in 10-20 years time there's going to be the standard sape. You know, now we have the standard violins and cellos and guitars, so yeah, who knows where it's going to end up.
Are there purists in the field who are kind of bucking the trend and saying, no, we should keep the sape in its original form, and being critical of all of you who innovate?
You know, I'm laughing because some people call me the purist. So I still play the more traditional sape, even though it's mine has changed a little bit and adapted a little bit. But you know, our elders are all very supportive of the sape adapting and changing as well. And they say, you know, whatever it takes to keep the sape alive. And but what we all find very important, because I teach now as well, for us as a new generation of teachers, we always say that we want to teach the traditional way of playing and to share the traditional form of the sape, and then later on you can learn the contemporary sape as well.
Okay, we'll take a short break. We'll be back with more on Let's Talk. Welcome back to Let's Talk. I'm Sharaad Kuttan. With me, Alena Murang. She's a sape player Sarawak-born, now resides in Kuala Lumpur. We've been talking about the evolution of the sape. You said you're a teacher now, and you laughed a little when I asked if there are purists in the field, and you said that you're sometimes described as a purist. I understand, though, in some of the material that's been written about you, is that being a woman involved in sape playing is something extraordinary, that you're one of the few women who does play the sape. Can you explain what the ritual logic of that is, or what is it culturally that has prevented women from entering into sape playing until now?
In the past, so pre-1920s, 1930s, the sape was used for ritual healing. So it was used as a medium to channel spirits. We don't know much about that function now, but from what I heard from actually one of the researchers, there would be certain sapes for certain spirits and certain sapes used for to heal certain ailments. And then the tribes, many of them became Christian in the 1930s to 1960s. So in that period, a lot of our art and music was actually put aside because their function was for ritual. And so because of that, and during that period, like my father's generation, they were the first to go to school and the first to leave the rainforest. So there wasn't a lot of art and music wasn't prioritized, right? So that's why the sape and a lot of our music skipped my father's generation. Doesn't matter if you were a man or a woman. And then come my generation, we wanted to start reviving and learning about our roots. So my cousins and I, there are 7 of us girls, and we approached a sape master, Matthew Ngao, who lives outside of Kuching. And we just said, Uncle, can you teach us the sape? Like, little did we know, we didn't know why women couldn't touch the sape or anything. We just wanted to learn this instrument. And only a few years ago, I learned from him that he actually went back home and was starting to question himself, should I teach these girls the sape? You know, they're girls, they're females, what would the community say about me? And so in the past, it was the men who carried out the rituals. That's why women couldn't even hold the sape. And he said to himself, you know, there's nobody of that generation learning now. So I want to teach these girls. So we were his first students, actually. And
Wonderful.
we were one of the few from our generation to even start learning.
Yeah, you know, there is an amazing pattern in what you're talking about, especially the coming of religions like Christianity and the conflict between that and traditional religions. I will leave that aside. I do want to ask you, though, you know, are you interested to go back to a time where there was that ritual power? Because the thing that you allude to is that music is healing, or potentially healing, at least seen within its cultural context. Is that something you think music is, apart from entertainment, which is what most of us think of when we think of music as having a function? It's entertainment, it's about dancing, but it's not about healing. And healing is a very deep, deep thing, isn't it?
It is a very deep thing. So with the sape music now, so we don't play or we don't know of the ritual songs from the past, right? And the sape we play today is called the human sape. And
the human sape?
Yeah, so the sape used for ritual is called sape Bali, which is the spirit sape. So now we play the human sape, which is for dancing, for entertainment. But I still find it very healing and very meditative, even when I'm playing it. And, you know, I've had people hear the sape, or people from an audience come to me and say they felt so touched, or, you know, they come in tears or something like that. So I do believe in the healing power of this music. And, you know, if I have been reading about healing music and healing vibrations and things like that. So it is something I would like to explore more. But when you talk about, you know, going back to the old religion and exploring that, and, you know, the healings and the rituals alongside that, that's a very difficult path to go down, because nobody practices that anymore. And I think that if you do go into that, you need to be guided. It's not something that you can just, you know, fall into like that. Or
maybe just invent out of thin air.
Yeah.
I do want to ask you, though, there's a very interesting question of music and the tones that and sounds that music creates and its relationship to our brain, our cognitive functions.
Yeah.
But there's also the question of lyrics, and I understand that you've made an effort to sing in Kelabit and Kenyah. I believe that's 2 languages, right? So where does that fit in? In the traditional musical form, is there singing? Are there lyrics? Are there songs as such? Or, you know, and how does that work?
So in our cultures, the sape was actually instrumental, and then we had a cappella singing. And it was my teacher, Matthew Ngao, who put the two together. So now we sing with the sape, but actually not many sape players sing with the sape. Today there's only a handful of us that do it. And I think it's very important to sing in Kelabit and Kenyah. I'm not fluent in the language, and I was doing some research, and it's something like 70 to 80% of languages in Malaysia are either threatened or endangered, so they could die out in my generation or the next generation. So I think music is a very powerful way to keep languages alive, and it's a way that I'm learning the language as well, so it brings me closer to the generation above me, because I'm always messaging them like, hey, what does this mean? How do you say this in this language?
Did you learn Kelabit or Kenyah at all at school? Was it some,
No.
there's no formal instruction in the language?
There's no formal instruction. In Sarawak, there's only Bahasa Iban that you can take as an SPM language. So these are languages, even the written form is not standardized. So it's quite, it is a challenge to learn. I didn't grow up speaking it fluently, so I know the basics of it.
Right, and
Yeah.
so often, you know, anthropologists are involved in preserving languages.
Yeah.
Your mother might have done that herself. I'm very interested to know the musical quality of Kelabit in Kenyah, and how does that operate? As you as a musician, is there something musical about Kelabit and Kenyah as languages?
You know, I've never really thought about it, but I think what I always find really amazing from the reactions of an audience is that they don't understand the words or the lyrics, and it's still, you know, they still feel it. I don't know why, there's no explanation for that. But in learning the old Kelabit songs, it's very difficult because it's in a language called Kelabit Dalim or Kelabit Dalam, so it's a very deep, poetic language that, you know, my father's generation and the one above him have debates and discussions over what the meaning actually is of the song. So it's really interesting going through that whole process with them, and then coming out with me and my cousins presenting the song in a new way.
So is it you know, the songs thematically, what do they have to do? Does it have to do with community life or the afterlife? What is it?
Many of the Kenyah songs that I sing are actually about togetherness, being together with my very true friends, and there's always elements of the river, right? We love the river. So that's for the Kenyah songs. And then for the Kelabit songs, the ones that I've learned actually from the grand aunties have a very common thread of womanhood. So for example, the song Midang Midang, which I released a music video to last year, that's about a young girl calling out the names of different men who she wants to meet. Like it's a bit like a courtship song. Another song, Re La Kwa, is from the point of view of a young girl, and she's singing about all the tasks that she has to do daily and how difficult it is, like going to collect water in bamboo. It's really hot today and the bamboo is really heavy, or my basket is just too full of padi. Yes, it's really
And that's not exactly your life, right? So when
it's
you
not, but there can be similarities, you know, like you can somehow, when you start to dissect it, you can like draw parallels, right?
Okay, will there be more contemporary motifs in the songs going forward? Are you likely to be singing about just waiting at the bus stop for a bus, or you know, the travails of urban life? I mean, could that enter into the language? And does Kelabit and Kenyah have the vocabulary to deal with contemporary life?
You have a lot of good questions. I've never thought of that, you know, because I've always, so we're planning some new songs and I've written lyrics to them, and they don't have elements of urban life directly, but they're more towards your inner being and your inner spirit, which I think kind of transcends, you know, urban life or rural life. So we have like elements of the wind. There's a song about, you know, meeting someone and you feel like you've known them from a long time ago. So it's more towards that kind of element. We have a warrior song, which is very much about semangat and fire. And yeah, but I think in our music videos and in the actual sound of the tracks, we try to be more contemporary. to appeal to like that urban contemporary crowd.
Okay, we'll take a short break. I'm with Alena Murang, and stay tuned for more on Let's Talk. Welcome back to Let's Talk. I'm Sharaad Kuttan, with me Alena Murang. She's a sape player. We've been talking about the traditions of the Kelabit and Kenyah people and, in fact, the question of language. Now, I believe, Alena, you have a movement, or you start a movement, hashtag, we are ancestors. Is that it? Is that correct?
We are our ancestors.
Okay, explain, what is we are our ancestors?
Okay, so backstory, my cousin slash producer slash guitarist Joshua Maran and I, we wrote a song 2 years ago called Gituan, and it's a reflection of, we were reading and discovering about who some of our great ancestors were. This man called Terkini who could travel the cosmos and live on Earth as well, and the things that was important back then, like the ability to provide food, so have plant rice, to hunt well, was very important then, and it would give you spiritual power. And you know, those things are still important today, right? The ability to provide for your families. And you know, in this very kind of like deep reflection, I just thought about, you know, how we are who we are today because of those who came before us, right? And I think that sums it up really, how we are our ancestors.
It's got a nice cyclical kind of quality to it because it sort of projects the present back into the past as if they were contemporaneous. Okay, very interesting. So you talk about Gituan, and I wonder to what extent are there venues available for all us Malaysians to kind of access your work, the work of, you know, of your cousin and the people that you mentioned. How do we find it?
So most of my work is online. It's on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Deezer, and what have you. I try to tell a lot of stories on Instagram and my Facebook as well. And yeah.
Do you find, is there a community of Kelabit and Kenyah kind of language orientated sape players? Is that a community that's working together or quite diverse in its orientation?
We have it more as a private community. So we have a WhatsApp group of sape players in the world. So I think there's about 100 of us. So there we're always sharing and supporting each other over there, but not kind of a platform that is online and open to the public. I think I work more with Austronesian language groups. So there's a lot of, not a lot, but there's some kind of Austronesian support groups on Facebook. And then there's a production I work with called Smaller Island Big Song. And they're very supportive. And through that, there's kind of a network of international media and things like that. So that's been very interesting, exploring the Austronesian heritage.
Okay, so and brings us to the question of world music, and of course, you know, there's a world music festival that Sharaads very famously hosted over the last decade or so, the Rainforest Festival. Is that something that you find enabling, or are there constraints imposed on you when you enter into the world of producing for, you know, kind of labels that are world music?
You know, the Rainforest World Music Festival started in 1998, and I went every single year. So I think I have to say that that festival really had an impact on who I am today. And no, I think it's a beautiful festival. There's not a great world music network in Southeast Asia when it comes to like media, PR, and festivals and labels. So Rainforest Music Festival, I think, is great. The world music scene globally is very small and very niche. So it's just, it's very supportive. So it's just a way of finding, you know, who suits you best and who understands your story and your narrative and your purpose.
And these were the producers. You're talking about the producers now.
Yeah, producers or labels.
Okay, and what about audiences? Is Is sape playing something that has gained ground in Malaysia, in the larger Malaysia? You know, are there barriers to the appreciation of sape for other Malaysians?
So I started playing sape in KL in about 2015, I think, and I could only play more and more because people were so curious, you know, and not just curious about sape, but curious about all the stories surrounding sape, and you know, what is Sarawak and what is Borneo, like Malaysians, right? So yeah, there's definitely been a greater appreciation of the music in the last 5 years, and that's why I can do what I do.
And what's next for you?
What's next for me? So I'm planning on releasing more singles, kind of with a new sound, and more music videos as well. We're doing some shows. You know, now we do like a lot of virtual live shows. So we have ones the following weekends coming up as well, involving dancers. We have a dance troupe and building my band.
And so to access that, we go to your personal website?
Yeah, I think if you go to my website, all my shows and the links are over there.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much, Alena, for being with me this evening. That's all we have for Let's Talk. I've been speaking to Alena Murang. She's a sape player based in Kuala Lumpur. Sape, of course, is a lute instrument from Sarawak. That's all we have for you tonight. I'm Sharaad Kuttan, only on Astro AWANI.